Something is happening inside the Cleveland Browns organization right now that nobody is talking about loudly enough, and honestly, I think that's a problem. Because what I'm seeing, what I've been watching unfold over the past several weeks, it's not just off-season drama. It's not just noise. There is a real question about who controls the direction of this team, who gets to decide who plays quarterback in Cleveland, and whether Shedeur Sanders is being set up to fail by the very people who are supposed to be on his side. I want to walk you through all of it, not the surface stuff, not the hot takes. I want to get into the actual substance of what's going on, because this situation deserves more than a 30-second reaction clip. Let me start with Jeudy, because that's where this whole thing begins to unravel. When the news broke that Jeudy had been down in Florida throwing routes with Deshaun Watson while the Browns were about to begin their official offseason workout program, my first reaction wasn't anger. It was more like quiet disbelief. Because I remember where we just came from. I remember what Shedeur Sanders did in the back half of last season. I remember watching that kid step onto an NFL field for the first time with essentially no meaningful practice reps, no preseason conditioning under the starting offense, nothing. They threw him in cold, and somehow he didn't just survive. He won. He won the last 2 games of the season, both against divisional opponents, and he did it against defenses that had full film on every rookie tendency you could imagine. That's not luck. That's not a hot week. That's a player who is built differently. And then I see Jeudy, the guy who was supposed to be one of Shedeur's primary weapons heading into this offseason, sneaking down to Florida to work out privately with Deshaun Watson. Watson, who hadn't been in the Browns building. Watson, who according to Browns offensive coordinator Todd Monken, hadn't even shown his face at the facility. So what exactly is going on down there? What is the purpose of that workout? What is being built? And more importantly, what is being planned? I'm not a conspiracy theorist by nature. I try to look at things logically, weigh the evidence, give people the benefit of the doubt. But I also believe in patterns. And Jeudy's pattern inside that locker room is not clean. We had issues under the previous regime with Kevin Stefanski, quiet moments of friction that never quite made the headlines but that players around the league were aware of. Little things that added up. The kind of stuff that doesn't show up in the injury report but absolutely affects team chemistry and a young quarterback's ability to build confidence in his receivers. Jeudy has been around for that. And now, instead of spending this critical offseason period building rapport with the guy who finished the season as the starter, the guy who earned the right to at least enter camp with first-team reps, he's in Florida throwing balls with a quarterback who hasn't played a full game since tearing his Achilles in Week 7 of 2024. Let me be crystal clear about Deshaun Watson's situation, because I think a lot of people are still glossing over just how serious this is. The man tore his Achilles in 2024. That alone is a devastating injury for any athlete, but particularly for a quarterback. Because so much of what makes a quarterback dangerous, the pocket mobility, the ability to step into throws, the quick release under pressure, all of that is tied to lower body explosiveness and stability. Achilles tears don't just heal overnight. They require a full year of grueling rehab just to get back to something resembling baseline. And then what happened? He re-tore it. He injured the same Achilles again during the recovery process. That's not a setback. That's a catastrophe. His own owner, Jimmy Haslam, called the Watson era a swing and a miss. Those were his words. The owner of the franchise used that specific language about his starting quarterback. And yet somehow Watson is still floating around in the periphery of this conversation as if he's a legitimate competitor for the starting job. I don't understand the logic. I genuinely do not. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders is doing everything right. Everything. He's in the building. He's putting in the work. He's studying the offense, building relationships with teammates, doing the quiet daily grind that separates players who belong in this league from players who just visit it for a couple of years. He's not making headlines for working out with the wrong people. He's not stirring controversy. He's just preparing to be the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, which he has every right to do based on how he closed out last season. Tony Rizzo said something the other day that cut right through all the noise, and I want to repeat it because I think it deserves to be said again. He basically asked, how in the world is Shedeur not the undisputed starting quarterback of this team right now? And that's not a rhetorical question. That's a legitimate challenge to anyone in the Browns front office who has been dancing around this issue. You took a rookie quarterback, gave him no training camp reps with the first team, threw him into the fire in week 11 or 12 when the season was already spiraling, and watched him respond by winning 3 games. 3 games, including the final 2 of the season, against division rivals, against teams that were playing for something, against defenses that had weeks to prepare for whatever he was going to show them. And he still found a way to win. That's the context. That's the backdrop against which everything happening right now needs to be evaluated. Because if you strip away all the noise, all the Jeudy Watson drama, all the owner comments, all the offseason politics, what you're left with is this. Shedeur Sanders is the most recent quarterback on this roster to actually win a game for the Cleveland Browns. That's a fact. And in professional football, when you're a young quarterback coming off back-to-back wins to close the season, the expectation is that you carry that momentum into the following year as the unquestioned starter. That's how this is supposed to work. What's being allowed to happen instead is that Shedeur is being made to compete for a job he already earned. And I understand the party line. I've heard it. He's a rookie. He has to prove himself. Nobody gets handed anything in this league. Fine. I respect the competitive philosophy. I really do. But there's a difference between making a young quarterback earn his stripes through hard work and development and creating an artificial competition with a player who hasn't been healthy enough to compete in over a year. One of those things builds a quarterback. The other one just creates confusion, fractures locker room loyalties, and gives opportunists like Jeudy an excuse to hedge their bets. That's what the Florida workout represents to me. It's hedging. It's Jeudy, a veteran receiver who knows exactly how this league works, choosing to keep his options open rather than committing fully to the young quarterback who the Browns are supposed to be building around, and that's corrosive. Not in a loud, dramatic way, not in a way that makes SportsCenter, but quietly, steadily, in the way that erodes trust and fractures the bond between a quarterback and his receivers before training camp even begins. Think about what it means for a young quarterback to watch his starting receiver spend the offseason throwing routes with the competition. I don't care how mentally strong you are, how locked in and professional. That image stays with you. It plants a seed of doubt. It makes you wonder who in that locker room is actually with you and who is just waiting to see which way the wind blows. For a 22-year-old trying to establish himself as the alpha in an NFL locker room, that kind of uncertainty can be genuinely damaging. It's the kind of thing veteran teammates are supposed to protect young quarterbacks from, not manufacture. The broader thing that bothers me about this whole situation is the absence of accountability. Where is the organizational clarity from the Browns? Where is the statement from the new coaching staff or the front office that simply says, here's where we stand, here's how this competition is going to work, here's our process? Because right now, what we have is a vacuum of clear messaging, and vacuums in NFL locker rooms do not stay empty for long. They get filled with speculation, with side conversations, with private workouts in Florida, and with the kind of low-level chaos that makes it incredibly difficult for a young quarterback to find his footing. I've watched quarterbacks get derailed by less than this. I've seen franchises sabotage promising young passers not through malice, but through disorganization, mixed signals, and front offices that couldn't commit to a direction early enough. Cleveland has a history here. The Browns have been cycling through quarterbacks for 2 decades, and every single time there was a moment where a clear choice could have been made, where someone could have said, this is our guy, we're building around him, full stop. And every single time, that clarity never arrived. I'm not willing to let that happen to Shedeur Sanders. Not without saying something about it, because what I see in that kid is different. I've watched him play under pressure. I watched him play his entire college career at Colorado under a level of national scrutiny that most NFL quarterbacks never face in their pro careers. I watched him get hit, get up, make the next throw, get hit again, and keep finding ways to compete. That's not something you teach a player. That either lives inside you or it doesn't. And in Shedeur, it clearly does. The stuff about Dorian Thompson-Robinson also being absent in the early offseason weeks adds another layer. When your backup quarterback is nowhere to be found and your supposed starter from the second half of last season is grinding alone while a veteran receiver jets off to Florida to work out with the broken-down former starter, that tells you something about this building's culture. It tells you there's no unified vision, no leadership voice saying this is the direction we're going and everyone gets in line. You know what I keep coming back to? The Watson contract situation. That is the quiet elephant in every room when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. The financial obligations tied to that deal have shaped organizational thinking in ways that are genuinely unhealthy for a team trying to build something real. When you have that much money committed to a player who can't stay healthy and hasn't played meaningful football in years, it creates a distorted incentive structure. Suddenly, Giving Watson every possible chance to compete isn't just a football decision, it's a financial justification exercise, an attempt to salvage something, anything, from one of the worst contracts in modern NFL history. And Shedeur gets caught in the crossfire. His development, his confidence, his ability to enter training camp as the clear starter, all of it gets compromised because the organization is still looking for a way to not admit that the Watson era is completely and totally over. And it is over. Even the optimists who thought Watson could recover with the right timeline have gone quiet. This isn't a guy who had a bad year and needs a reset. He's been absent from professional football for the better part of 2 years, suffered the same catastrophic injury twice on the same leg, and is now in his 30s trying to come back from something that derailed careers of players who were younger and more durable. Watson's days as a starting NFL quarterback are behind him. The Browns just haven't found a way to say that publicly yet. And that uncertainty, that organizational unwillingness to just state the obvious, is what's creating space for Jeudy to do what he's doing. It's what's creating space for private workouts and whisper campaigns and all the quiet maneuvering that poisons a locker room. If the Browns simply came out and said, Shedeur Sanders is our quarterback, the conversation changes overnight. Jeudy stops working out in Florida because there's no angle to play. Watson either accepts a backup mentor role or moves on. The locker room knows who they're blocking for. Clarity changes everything. But in the absence of that clarity, what we have is exactly what we're watching. A young quarterback who earned his starting job through performance being made to justify his existence. A veteran receiver hedging his bets by keeping one foot in the Watson camp. And a franchise that spent enormous resources on a player who can't give them anything in return, trying to manage its way out of an impossible situation without ever fully committing to the future that's standing right in front of them. I want to be honest about something. I've been a Shedeur Sanders believer since before the draft. I thought the skepticism about his football intelligence was overblown. I thought the criticism of his arm mechanics was nitpicky. And mostly, I thought the people questioning his competitive fire had simply never watched him play a full game against a real defense. Because if they had, those questions wouldn't exist. He plays with an edge. He plays with a chip. He plays like someone who has been doubted his entire life and has made peace with that doubt and turned it into fuel. That's the kind of player you build a franchise around. What the Browns need to understand is that windows for this kind of player do not stay open forever. The league is full of stories about young quarterbacks who had legitimate potential but got lost inside organizations that didn't know how to nurture them, who got stuck behind the wrong veterans, or saddled with the wrong offensive scheme, or surrounded by teammates who were more invested in the previous regime than the future. Shedeur is navigating all of that in real time right now in the offseason when the foundation for next season is being poured. What happens in these next few months matters enormously. The chemistry he builds or fails to build, the authority he establishes or fails to establish, the clarity or confusion that surrounds his role on this team, all of that will show up on the field in September. So when I see Jeudy flying down to Florida to throw with Deshaun Watson while Shedeur is in the building putting in work, I don't just see a wide receiver making a questionable offseason choice. I see a team failing to protect its most important investment. I see an organization that still hasn't figured out what it wants to be. And I see a 22-year-old quarterback who, despite all of that, keeps showing up and keeps competing because that's what he's wired to do. The Browns need to meet that energy. They need to honor what Shedeur showed them at the end of last season by giving him the clarity and the support that every starting quarterback deserves entering a new year. Cut through the noise. End the private workout diplomacy. Make the statement. Shedeur Sanders is your quarterback. Everything else is distraction.